So, things in the US aren't going so well.
You know, when we were young, you could watch cartoons without having to worry. Now parents have to sit there and worry about what are they trying to inject in? What type of ideology are they trying to pursue? And that is wrong.
He's mad at Disney, and this is just the latest in this weird culture war that US conservatives have waged on the company. Long story short is that after a lot of controversy, Disney said they were against the recent Don't Say Gay legislation in Florida. And since then, people have been scrutinizing every single thing the company's ever done. Of course, none of this is new. People have been worried about Disney pushing a gay or trans agenda many times before. But the intensity and moral panic this time is really off the charts. People are upset that in recent years, Disney has been more explicit about adding queer characters to their shows and movies.
Why is this being pushed? I don't know if Gonzo's a cross-dresser or transgender, but if Gonzo is transgender, that is a disorder.
But when DeSantis said that when we were young, you could watch cartoons without having to worry, what was he referring to? Let's talk about Disney's trans agenda.
We'll fit and fly from tree to tree. Come, my dears, you're safe with me. Whoops!
I think it's a great thing that Disney is having more queer moments and characters. After a long time of putting blink and you'll miss it characters and other types of half-hearted representation, it's refreshing. But if you think there wasn't queerness in Disney cartoons before that, well, that's just not true. I've already covered their long history with queer coding, both good and bad. But with the recent moral panic focusing a lot on trans people, I think we should look at Disney's history with that. Before I begin, let me just clarify a few things. There weren't any trans characters in early Disney. The examples I talk about are better described under gender variance. Basically, just expressions of gender that don't fit within a strict cisgender binary. A lot of the time, this was done with cross-dressing, but that doesn't mean trans. When Disney started making cartoons in the early 20th century, a lot of mainstream views on queer people were mashed together. People we might label today as trans might have just been assumed to be gay, since being trans wasn't yet a separate and established identity. Similarly, if you were a gay man, many people would assume that you'd want to wear dresses and be a woman, because there was little understanding of the difference between gender and sexuality. And even today, many people don't know the difference. And so many assume trans people are cross-dressers, not because it's impossible for a trans man to be a drag queen, but because society often projects stereotypes onto the bodies of trans people. So, old Disney cartoons aren't going to have a nuanced perspective on gender that fits our modern vocab. But by looking at old cartoons, we can see where gender variance appears, how it's used, and what it represents. The earliest example I'm aware of is from the 1932 silly symphony King Neptune. And before I continue, let me just say that the music by Lee Harling is incredible. A pirate sticks out before having a jug smashed on their head. I've seen many people say this character is queer-coded to be gay, but without a specific document or quote, there's no way to know what the exact intention was. However, it's clear that the joke is the pirate is effeminate, and with the bows in the hair, the pink blouse, and the bracelets, none of which are worn by the other pirates, it looks a lot like cross-dressing. But that's the joke. Men are normally masculine, and cross-dressing is emasculating and funny. And in this situation, people who do it get jugs smashed into their faces. And it gets worse. But before I continue, I just want to take a second to thank the sponsor of today's video, Scentbird. As you'll know, I recently started transitioning, and as a trans woman, I sometimes feel like I'm starting from scratch. I'm learning new ways to express myself and be seen by others, and not only can that be stressful, but it can also get expensive when it feels like I have to try so many things to see what I like. And if you want some of those high quality brands, the prices can be like a couple $100s for just one bottle. Which is why I love Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to test out certain scents without having to commit to a full bottle. Scentbird works with brands like Versace, Prada, and Gucci. You can get luxury brands without having to pay luxury prices. For just $16 a month, you can get a 30-day supply of a fragrance of your choosing. And if you use our code DREAMSOUNDS, you can get 55% off, which means that your first month is only $7. If you're like me and are just starting out with perfume, you'll enjoy Scentbird's intro quiz that helps pick out the perfect perfume or cologne for you based on your preferences, so you don't have to learn a lot about fragrances to know which scents are right for you. They have options for men and women, but really their fragrances are for people of all genders, so you can mix and match however you'd like. This month I got Pure Sugar by Eau de Juice, which is just great. It's the perfect scent for sunny spring days. Its fruity top notes of wild strawberry and pink grapefruit are perfectly complemented by hints of pink pepper and jasmine. I also have a few other fragrances from Scentbird, such as Velvet by Commodity and Floreale by Vince Camuto. As you can see, each vial comes in a cool carrying case, and if you want to swap cases, it's really easy to just pop one out and put the other in. And honestly, I'm kind of obsessed with Floreale. I didn't realize how much just putting on some perfume can really change my mood, and the rich vanilla scent goes with almost any occasion. You deserve to smell the way you want, so check out Scentbird today, and be sure to use our code DREAMSOUNDS to get 55% off your first month. That's just $7 for your first month of Scentbird, only available in the US and Canada. And a huge thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. In the sequel to the smash hit The Three Little Pigs, the Big Bad Wolf continues the story, introducing Little Red Riding Hood as well, and there's a moment where the wolf cross-dresses.
I'll get 'em. You fit and fly from tree to tree. Come, come, my dears, you're safe with me. Whoops!
This is clearly a joke, but it's more than that. It's a plot device, and this isn't the only time that he cross-dresses in the short. The wolf is trying to lure the characters, ultimately to eat them. Gender variance is a way to deceive them. Even changing his voice and singing an effeminate song about being a fairy is part of the ruse. This sets off some alarm bells. The joke part of it is clearly that the wolf is masculine, so the juxtaposition of that with femininity is supposed to be funny. The absurdity of expectation and letdown is a basic trope in comedy, but there are sinister implications. What is the expectation? And what is the letdown that makes the situation absurd? Well, that's where the transphobia is. The expectation and subsequent letdown is the joke, and it only makes sense if you assume that fitting into binary gender roles is the norm. Anyone outside of that, whether they're cis or trans, becomes a joke, and everyone else is laughing at them. It's also important to keep in mind that I don't think cross-dressing for comedy is inherently transphobic. Brian Jordan Alvarez is a comedian who does a lot of hilarious sketches and movies, many of them involving him switching genders back and forth. And though they involve cross-dressing as he's a gay man, I never have the feeling that it's in any way transphobic or mocking gender variance. Maybe it's because he's queer, but I never feel like gender variance is the butt of the joke. But I'm not saying this to imply that the wolf cross-dressing is in any way supportive of trans people. And the whole premise was also made during a time when cross-dressing was not only mocked by society, but it was also illegal. And the wolf trying to use cross-dressing as a means to literally eat a child is not lost on me when queer people are often viewed as predators by society. I think in talking about this, it's important to help anyone watching, especially those who may not be trans, understand what is offensive about these things. I feel too often when talking about transphobia in comedy, it's sometimes hard to understand which parts of the joke are offensive. Jokes like this are harmful because they perpetuate stereotypes and social prejudices that often can be life-threatening for trans people. But this connection can be hard to see if you don't know what to look for. And that's what can be insidious about transphobia. When being cis is just the default, the norm, unless you're trans, you might not understand how it feels to be on the outside of that. But gender variance isn't always negative, even in these earlier cartoons. For example, everyone knows that Walt Disney voiced Mickey Mouse, but did you know that there was actually a period in which he voiced Minnie Mouse as well? There are also other instances of this in Disney history, from women in Japan voicing Mickey to even two of the Three Little Pigs being voiced by women. In a field like animation that does have a history of queerphobia, it's interesting to see gender variance not be a punchline. And it goes to show how we as audience members perceive and gender voices. The fact that gender bending is such a common trope in voice acting shows that actually these binary ways of thinking about gender are both holding us back and also not that strong to begin with. Also, look at this Mickey Mouse comic. The cross-dressing is clearly part of the joke, but it's interesting to see it as more of a power than something shameful. It plays into stereotypes about gender variance being solely used for deception, but Mickey's ability to look like Minnie gives him the upper hand. Something important to note when talking about gender variance in the early 1900s US is that it didn't only have to do with homophobia or transphobia. In this short, Mickey and his friends put on a minstrel show, with Mickey even getting in blackface for the occasion. And as you can see, he also cross-dresses. This wasn't uncommon in minstrel, and for many, minstrel was the first time that female impersonation reached a mainstream audience. That can obviously be transphobic, but racism is the focus, and the short shows a very harrowing side of US history. As you can see, gender variance in animation isn't a modern thing. You can find it throughout Disney history. And of course, some of the most notable examples of gender variance in early cartoons come from Bugs Bunny, obviously a non-Disney character, but one who is not afraid to drag it up. So, what's Disney's trans agenda? Well, back then, it wasn't different than the mainstream US approach. Gender variance, like all types of queerness, was stereotyped and vilified. But it wasn't always bad. The gender variance in voice acting was pretty cool, honestly, and it's interesting to see the gender binary broken down that way, though I'm sure Walt didn't think of that when he was voicing Minnie. And in the decades since, gender variance hasn't always been a punchline. Disney's trans agenda is just getting started, but I do think we've crossed the point where the agenda, for lack of a better word, is no longer against trans and non-binary people, but with them. After all of the recent backlash against the company after the Don't Say Gay nonsense, I hope that it only continues to get better. And with some recent developments, who knows, maybe a trans main character will be in theaters sooner than we might think. As more queer people are able to get themselves into writing rooms and be open at work, queer visibility only gets better, and younger generations are saved from the confusion and sadness of not being able to see themselves on screen. But though there is yet to be a trans Disney character, queer people have never needed permission to empathize with those movies. Hell, that's kind of what this channel is all about. Talking about what happens when you have generations of queer people growing up empathizing with films that might not empathize with them. And that specific dynamic is a part of queer history. In a world where queer representation is still not a given, taking agency over what we consume and creating our own spaces with that can be a superpower. But it's important to remember that trans people have always been here. And no matter how long it takes the world to catch up, we always will be. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? The big bad wolf, the big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad